Hey everyone, in this video we're going to dive into a simple formula for clear communication. So you may be wondering, why does clear communication matter? Well, there's a couple reasons for this. First and foremost is that clear communication is going to keep everything on track. There's an old saying that goes, if you aim at nothing, you're going to hit it every time. And nowhere is this more true than in communication. A couple will often start off talking about a topic, soon to be sidetracked down a rabbit trail, and then down another rabbit trail, and then down another rabbit trail. Then after some time has passed, both people have forgot what they were talking about in the first place, but they do know that they're absolutely and utterly exhausted. So clear communication matters because it's going to keep the conversation on track. It's going to help you get to where you want to go. Chances are, if you don't have a goal in mind, you're not going to like where you end up. Second reason that clear communication matters is that it gives people the opportunity to say yes. And this is so important. Now, fortunately, this is something that I learned early on. I was a ministry intern in a children's ministry. And one of my jobs in the children's ministry department was this never-ending cycle of recruiting volunteers for a children's ministry. Now, initially I was pretty nervous about asking, and one of the more seasoned volunteers saw me and noticed that I was nervous, and she said, "Jed, you've just got to start asking people. The worst that anybody can say is no, and they can't say yes unless you ask and give them an opportunity to say yes." Now, fortunately, I took this advice to heart, and I started asking, and I was pleasantly surprised at how many people jumped in to help. Now, fast forward a couple years later, I was a children's pastor, pastoring at my very first church, and there was a holiday weekend that came up. And one Sunday, it seemed like one children's ministry volunteer, one Sunday school teacher after another came up to me and said, "Jed, I won't be here next week. You'll have to find somebody to fill in for me." So by the end of that Sunday, I looked and I realized, well, wait a minute, next week it's going to be just me leading the children's ministry. Well, Monday rolled around and I realized I needed to start looking for people to fill all of these slots pretty quick. And again, kind of this feeling of nervousness and anxiety began to well up inside me. But I remembered those words from years ago. "Jed, you might as well ask. The worst somebody can say is no. And if you don't ask, you're not giving them the opportunity to say yes." And so I sat down on this day, grabbed my phone, grabbed a cup of coffee, and said, all right, I'm going to turn this into a game. I'm going to see how many people I can call in an hour, how many people I can ask. Well, here's the good news, is it didn't even take me an hour to fill every single slot. I started calling, I started asking, I was clear on what I was asking for, which was somebody to fill in on this particular Sunday when it seemed like the entire children's ministry all planned their vacations at the same time. And just kind of person after person said, "Yeah, I'll fill in and help." And I was just overwhelmed at how many people were eager to say yes. But again, people can't say yes if you're not clear, and if you don't ask and give them an opportunity to say yes. All right, so before diving into the formula itself, I do want to restate something that you probably already know, but that's that there's no formula, no magic words that you can say, no right way of doing things that are going to guarantee that a conversation is going to go well. And there's a verse that talks about that. It's found in the book of Proverbs, Proverbs 29:22, and it says this: "An angry man stirs up conflict, and a hot-tempered man increases rebellion." So it kind of states the obvious. An angry person stirs up conflict. Some people just are angry, and they do what angry people do. They stir up conflict, dissension, and strife. There's that old saying that says, hurt people and are easily hurt by others. And the reason I bring this up is because it can cause you and I to take some of the pressure off of ourselves. We don't have to make the conversation go well. That's not our responsibility. Our job is to speak truth in love and grace, to be peacemakers to the best of our ability. So I had a professor who used to say, "Jed, when somebody overreacts, when their emotions go way above and beyond what the situation calls for, it usually says more about what's going on inside of them than it does about you and I." And so it's something good to keep in mind. We can't guarantee that there's going to be a good conversation with good outcomes, but we can guarantee that we're using good tools, good conflict resolution tools, and that's kind of what this formula is all about. So now let's dive into the very first part of this formula, and we're going to kind of pick it apart piece by piece, and then we'll dive into the whole thing at the end. So the first part of the formula goes like this. It says, when you, I feel. So when you come home late from work and don't call me, I feel sad. When you don't do your homework at night, I feel frustrated. When you, I feel. So let's pick this apart piece by piece. Two key words that I like are when you. That helps kind of avoid the common high conflict traps of you always and you never, right? So one way to confront that's almost guaranteed to not work well because it uses those trigger words are saying things like you always come home late, you never help around the house, you never clean up. And the reason I call those trigger words is because always and never rarely happen. Usually, if we're going to be accurate, it's, well, you most often don't pick up around the house. You don't help with chores as often as I like. I have to remind you to do your homework. But always and never are all inclusive. And so if I look at you and I say, you never turn your assignments in on time, your first thought that pops into your head might be, well, I turned in one assignment on time last week, and the entire conversation's been derailed. And so immediately, this formula starts off by using the language, when you. So it doesn't say you're always the problem. It doesn't even say you're the problem. It says, when you get home late and don't call me. So it kind of takes the pressure off. It doesn't say you're the problem, doesn't make it all inclusive. So probably enough said about that, and let's jump on to the next piece. So the next piece in the formula is I feel. And what I like about this is you're talking about how the problem directly impacts you. So when you come home late from work, I feel sad. When you don't do your homework, I feel frustrated. So you're connecting the problem to yourself and to your own feelings, your own emotions. And one of the ways that this formula can kind of help bring clarity to a conversation is if you do it before the conversation, it really challenges you to think about how the problem's affecting you personally and getting you prepared to share it. So chapter 6 of How to Have That Difficult Conversation That You've Been Avoiding talks about balancing grace and truth. And that's really what the next part of this formula is about. It's a good time for grace to come into the picture. So the next word is because. And this is a good time to bring in grace to the conversation, make it a grace-based conversation, and I'll show you how you can do that. When you come home from work late and don't call, I feel sad. I really miss hanging out with you. When you don't do your homework, I feel frustrated because I know you're really smart and have the potential to get really good grades in school. I see that you can do really, really well, and I want you to succeed. And so my suggestion is with this because this is a great time to bring grace into the picture. So now let's do a quick review. So this is a formula for clarity, and so far we've clarified the problem. When you come home late, when you don't finish your dinner, when you don't eat your vegetables, when you don't do your homework. So we clarified that the person's not the problem, but the problem's the problem. Second, we've clarified how the problem's impacted us personally. I feel sad, mad, angry, frustrated. Then we brought some grace in the conversation with because. Now we're gonna add more clarity by specifying what we would like to have happen. And again, other person can't say yes if we don't ask. So the next part of the formula is in the future, I would like. In the future, I would like you to call me and tell me if you're running late. In the future, I would like you to eat all your vegetables at dinner. In the future, I would like you to come home from school and do your homework right away. So we're offering a solution, we're offering hope. And what I like about this is it immediately brings up the idea that the problem's not unsolvable. there are solutions for it. And we're going to dive right into the last step, which wasn't in the original formula, but I think it's an important piece to add. And that's this idea of, do you have any other suggestions? So it's to invite the other person into the conversation. Basically, it's recognizing that there's not a take it or leave it approach to problem solving. It's not my idea or this simply isn't going to work. It's, hey, now let's enter into a discussion. This is what I would like, but let me hear from you. All right, so let me conclude by putting this all together, providing some specific examples of how you might use the formula. So when you come home late and don't call me and tell me you're going to be late, I feel really sad because I look forward to hanging out with you at the end of the day. I really look forward to our time together. In the future, if you're running late, I'd like you to give me a call. But what do you think? Do you have any other ideas? So one of the things with this formula is it can sound really rigid if you don't add your own personality and style to it, if you just go through it in kind of a rote, robotic manner. So there's a couple different ways you can use this formula. One, you can add your own personality and style to it, maybe practicing it, rehearsing it a couple times until you can say it in a way that's casual, that really fits you and who you are. Another way that you can use a formula is simply as a guide. So for some people, they're not going to actually go through and say every single one of the words in the formula, but prior to having a difficult conversation, they're going to use the formula to gain clarity. And that's really how I would suggest you're using this. If you're going to have a conversation that you know is going to be difficult or that you're feeling nervous about, go through the steps. When you clarify the problem in your mind, what are you having this conversation about? I feel. Clarify your own feelings. How does the problem impact you personally? Because how are you going to put grace into this conversation? How are you going to make sure your conversation is filled with both truth and grace? In the future, I would like, what solutions are you going to offer? Make sure you're not going into this conversation just dumping a bunch of hurt feelings and overwhelm onto the other person. Make sure that you're offering solutions. And then at the end, make sure that you're inviting the other person into the conversation too, that it's not just a monologue, but that you're having a dialogue about the solutions as well. All right, so now we're at the point that I really want to invite you into the dialogue. I want to hear your thoughts. Is there something that you learned from either this presentation or from the link to the article I posted? Something that really spoke to you or hit home? Have you used some of these techniques before? And if so, how did they work? Maybe you haven't used this exact formula, but you've used bits and pieces of it. You've had a difficult conversation where you've used the first part of the formula and you've clarified what the problem is when you, or maybe you've had a conversation where you've clarified your feelings. Talk about how that worked. Is there a time that you wish that you had used this? And why do you wish you had used this formula or pieces of this formula? Or maybe as we were going through this, you were thinking of a difficult conversation that you need to have and that you're going to have later on this week. And you could write about actually using this formula or using pieces of this formula and how it worked. So again, I want to hear from you in this week's discussion board, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts and insights on this formula for clarity.